whatever. And I don't think the CRCs have worked particularly well with the various e-infrastructure systems that we have around the country. So I've been really keen that we improve on that. And we've been talking to the ARDC for a few years about how we might do that. So in the absence of a workshop at our conference, we're going to open up to Keith and Rosie. Will you be doing anything, or are you just going to watch Keith's performance today?
I'm listening and learning intently.
Now, before our guests came on, we just learnt that ARDC staff have come off their monthly meeting and they had an Easter bonnet competition, something we don't do in the CRC Association, although we will be adopting it from now on. So Keith, have you actually got your Easter bonnet there?
I've actually hidden it away immediately after that meeting.
Oh,
no.
All righty. Fair enough. Well, I'll hand over to you, Keith, for discussion on ARDC and how to modern ways of handling our data.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Tony. As we were just warming up for this session, we were actually talking about Zoom meetings and how many Zoom meetings we have been through recently. And I thought, rather than expose you to yet another Zoom meeting seminar, I thought I'd try it a bit differently and make it a little more interactive. So what I've done, and I hope this works for you and you should now be able to see it, is set up an interactive session. So first of all, thank you very much for the introduction, Tony. Great to be here and great to be able to speak a little bit about managing your research data and managing it remotely, and what does that mean, especially in the time of COVID. Researchers, of course, will need to collaborate over data probably in a more virtual space, although many researchers are quite used to doing that already anyway. So what I've tried to do is pull together a whole range of different resources and materials and solutions that are out there. All slides will be available after this presentation, so please don't try and jot down all the different systems and solutions, etc., because there's going to be quite a lot of different considerations and systems coming up. But just go with the flow. Please provide your thoughts in the surveys. All the survey questions will be completely anonymous. So this is the bit where you can pull out your mobile phone. One way of doing it is pulling out your mobile phone or your iPad, just pointing it at the screen. Try and take a photograph of that QR code, and that will then open up something in your browser, which you can respond to all the survey questions. If you don't want to do it that way, you can always go with your phone to menti.com and then enter the code 123098.
I'm not seeing a QR code.
Keith, it's on your desktop for me at the moment.
Oh, so the screen sharing is...
make sure you screen share the screen and not the actual app, because I've just had an issue with it. You get the option between screen sharing a screen or an app, and just do the screen. Yep, there you go.
Now I am.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jordan.
It's all right. I'm going to go to that. Come on, phone.
Okay, people are already liking it, so it seems to be working. Oh, just love that love coming across. That's wonderful. Okay, I will. People can. If the QR code's not worked for you, you can still go to menti.com and use the code, and the code will remain on all the different slides too, so you'll be able to see that. So just to test if this is working, first question, where are you from? Just to give me an idea what the audience is I have in front of me. Okay, so a lot of others, okay. Cool. And when I think others, I'd probably, so a few of you, of course, work in the CRC Association. Gavin, you work at AARNet. Anybody else want to pipe up where they are from if they're not working in a CRC? You can unmute.
Hi, so I'm Marina Trigueros and I work at the John Curtin School of Medical Research, but I work for Australian Phenomics Network. So I'm the new communications and outreach coordinator. And I, yes, just started a month ago, and what a month has been.
Okay, welcome. Great to have you on board.
Keith, as you pointed out, I'm from AARNet, but I have had the honour, Tony, of working in a CRC in the past. You'll probably remember the Smart Services CRC.
Yeah, okay, great. Oh, so
I
inside.
love when people say it's an honour to work in them. And keep saying that after they don't need to say it.
No, they were good years.
Good.
Definitely.
Okay, so for those that, just a very quick little bit of perspective for those that don't know the Australian Research Data Commons, we are an NCRIS facility funded under the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy Program. So the NCRIS program drives research excellence and collaboration between researchers, government, industry. So it's Commonwealth funded. There's about 23 facilities around at present, and these facilities are there to provide services or facilities or infrastructure to support researchers and their collaborators. And some of these are in very specific disciplines. We are a facility that works across all disciplines. So the Australian Research Data Commons, our aim is to provide researchers with a competitive advantage through data. Now, we can't provide all the services and all the tools that are necessary in this landscape. Today, I'll be mentioning a few perspectives and tools and services that are out there. Some of them are ours, some of them are from other organizations. So what I will try to do is give you a bit of an overview of the landscape, but I'm also aware that I won't be able to cover everything. So this is just a range of perspectives and a range of considerations when thinking about managing your data and working on your data remotely. So starting from the start, when your researchers are actually going to start collaborating over their data and they want a place to put their data so they can work on it remotely, there's a number of things that are worth considering. So these are a few questions that you probably want to tackle right from the start. When your researcher sets up their research, think about who should get access to that data, who actually has rights to change that data, what arrangements do you need to have in place around versioning of the data, reverting back to older versions of the data if one of the collaborators makes a mistake in the data and changes it all around. Is there a good backup strategy behind it? Is it easy to revert to backups? And another very important aspect, which often gets forgotten, is what happens to the data at the end of the project. Does it just disappear? Does the storage die? Or is there a plan for somebody to adopt the data or look after the data on the longer term? So these sort of questions are typically the sort of things that get covered in data management plans. So we encourage organizations to think about having data management plans in place and requirements for researchers to provide to create research data management plans. That sort of allows you to ask these questions right from the start, and that allows you to think a little bit more about, to raise those questions and the researchers to think about those questions, and also for you to plan a piece of infrastructure and a landscape that will actually allow for it. So talking to CRCs and other organizations, I've noticed that there are different perspectives on data management plans, and data management plans can be at different scale. You can have it at the level of the whole of the CRC. You can set up a plan and an idea around it, or you can have it at the level of research projects, or you could even require it at the level of distinct data collections. So it's interesting to see this mix here. It's okay, mostly at the level of research projects. Okay, that's good to know. This makes sense because a lot of the data collections within those projects would be similar or related. So a few further considerations when looking at that data management plan and deciding on a place to actually put the data. a number of considerations on where to actually put the data. So does it need to sit on Australian soil? Does it need to be in a certified secure storage? Does it need to be encrypted at rest? Does it need to be encrypted in transit? Does the researcher require specific tools over this data, which would then define where it would be a good place to put the data? And I think also an interesting question in the context of CRCs, if you're going to put it somewhere and have a solution around this, who can actually support this solution? Does this put a burden on your CRC to maintain it, or is there a university IT department or a partner like CSIRO IT department that will manage this and keep this running? Do you pay for a commercial provider to provide this? Do you use services that are provided by facilities like NCRIS facilities? So these are a number of considerations to think about when you select a place to put the data. So talking to researchers around the country and research groups and research collaborations, I've heard of a range of different platforms that are in use, that are being used by researchers. So first of all, the first question is this: have you heard of any of these following platforms? And there's a whole array here, from very basic Dropbox personal accounts that some researchers spin up and use for their own purposes, up to more organized Dropbox collaborative sort of corporate accounts, RNet's cloud store solution, the Nectar Cloud, AWS, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure for compute, or Microsoft 365. These are just a few examples. So interesting to see Google Cloud and Microsoft 365 coming up very high, but also Dropbox quite well known as a solution. Please note, I'm not promoting Dropbox personal accounts, and one reason for that is that they actually don't necessarily sit on Australian soil. So when you're talking about data governance and having governance over the data that you hold, any data that your researchers put in a Dropbox personal accounts can be monitored by the US government, for example. So following on that question, in the context of your CRC, what do your researchers actually use? So this is where I'm intrigued to see what are the solutions that your CRC uses, or your researchers within the CRC use. Okay, so Microsoft 365 is coming up very, very high, yeah. Dropbox corporate accounts. So I'm intrigued, for those that are using the Dropbox corporate accounts, does the CRC have an account with the Dropbox, or is it rather that they use the institutional account for Dropbox?
That might be us from the association, Keith, because we use a corporate account for Dropbox.
Okay. So that would add up to the 4.
That could be 3 of the 4.
I think it is.
Okay, thanks. So I'd like to highlight just one or two of those solutions that I mentioned there. So one of the solutions that I mentioned there, and that is available to all Australian researchers, is RNet's cloud store solution. So if you're looking for a solution that's on Australian soil, free of charge to use for Australian researchers based at universities, Cloud Store is an easy solution that's out there, provides already replication in different locations and tape backup, multiple access methods, etc. And not only is it a place to store data and to collaborate over data, but it actually also has some tools over the top of it, like OnlyOffice, which allows you to edit documents, has a number of tools to pull in data off instruments, and provides an analysis environment, Jupyter Notebook or Jupyter Lab, to do analysis over that data. And in the end, it also provides tools to be able to publish the data out of Cloud Store. So that's one potential solution that's out there, and it's free to use for Australian researchers. And not only can a researcher set up an account, but you can also set up project workspaces with others that can join. So I'm not the expert on CloudStor. For any questions around that, save them up to the end. Gavin's here, so he can answer those better than I can. Another solution that was in that list is the Nectar Research Cloud. So this is run by the Australian Research Data Commons, and this is a cloud solution where Australian researchers can spin up a virtual machine and do their analysis in a virtual space. So we run this with a range of partners around Australia and federated across 8 institutions, and we have a range of registered users, and we're actually up till now already being used by 11 CRCs in the past. So this is another solution if your researchers are looking for a space either for themselves or to collaborate in. This is an option they can fire up if they want a virtual machine. A number of other possible platforms and solutions for researchers are what we call platforms or virtual laboratories. And these are just a few of them. There are a lot more. These are usually specific to a certain discipline or a certain research question. And these are virtual spaces where researchers can go in and pull in data, analyze data, take data out, etc. It depends a little on the way the virtual lab or platform has been set up. So here's just a few examples. The Eco Commons, which contains a range of terrestrial ecological data. As a researcher, you can go in and do analysis on that and pull out the data. The Biodiversity and Climate Change Virtual Laboratory, the Characterization Virtual Laboratory, which allows you to pull in imaging data and do analysis over the images and pull out the data. Galaxy Australia, which is for bioinformatics data, and has built-in workflows to analyze bioinformatics data. Orin for geospatial data, especially urban geospatial data, etc. And there's a whole range more of these. So these would be useful if your researcher happens to have a question that is related to these virtual labs and platforms. So I mentioned just the whole range of different possible solutions. Are there any other solutions that you use at your CRC that you haven't heard mentioned and you want to share here? Then please put them in. Okay, well, in that case, it looks like I've been very comprehensive. Cool. So one of the questions I've had from CRCs in the past, and one of the challenges that does come up is, how do you allow for access to these tools, these collaboration spaces for researchers from different universities and also external collaborators? And how do you manage that? What ways are there to manage the access and authentication and authorization to these environments? So a player in that space here in Australia is the Australian Access Federation, the AAF, and for all universities and CSIRO, all the researchers automatically have an AAF account. And that makes it easy for you as a CRC that has collaborators across these different organizations to actually make sure that they can all log into the same environment just using their usual login password. They also have a number of services for CRCs that will allow you to easily add external collaborators to also access the environment. And depending on the size of your CRC and where you're at, that can either be a solution that's run by maybe university IT department or run by the CRC itself. I won't go into the details here. I'm not a specialist on this one, but if you have any questions about these potential solutions and how you can use the AAF services to allow access to these virtual environments, please contact, here we are on the next slide, Andrew Bonis. So imagine these researchers are all working in these collaborative environments and entering their data and entering their information. You do want to have a little consistency across this data entry and this manipulation. And rather than every researcher coming up with their own way of entering data and that resulting in something that's not particularly consistent, it's much more useful to actually use consistent vocabularies. And one possible solution in that space, we have a research vocabularies service that we run, and that allows you to either put in vocabularies or use existing research vocabularies and then pull them out using widgets into your tools, so that rather than a researcher every time entering something different, you can just pull down from a list and then use the controlled list for data entry. So it's just one of those tools that can make sure that when data get managed remotely, it's actually consistent and useful. One other aspect I like to raise with especially with CRCs also, is the question around what happens with the data down the track. So a researcher and their collaborators generate a data set, and they use that to answer a research question or a question that is relevant to the collaboration. But once that question has been answered, what are you going to do with that data? And why would you put effort into that data or not? And one of the key opportunities I see in this space is enabling reproducibility. So researchers are more and more are being required to actually be able to show the findings behind their data and to be able to replicate their results. So I was really interested in throwing this question back at you and saying there's a range of different drivers you can have as an organization to care about reproducibility. And from your perspective, what do you see as key drivers to take care of that data, look after that data, and actually enable reproducibility down the track? So there's different arguments there. It could be, this is jumping around the whole time now. So, okay, the top one here is current business partners in the CRC. So making sure that data doesn't get lost, so current business partners in the CRC can actually benefit and reuse this data. Second up is other researchers in the group, so they can get access to the data and use it. And third is for academic journals, when they they're nowadays more and more require data to be published alongside the article. And then fourth, for other researchers outside, and fifth, for potential future adoption after the CRC. Okay, I'm still jumping around a little bit. Okay, thanks. I find this really interesting because this gives me a perspective on what your drivers are, and this will differ per CRC depending on what the aims are of the CRC and what sort of data you are producing and where data is an asset in your total product. So I tried today to go through a range of different aspects, a range of different considerations when thinking about working remotely with research data. Having gone through all of this and thinking from the perspective of your CRC, what do you see as the key challenges for your CRC for working remotely over research data? What are the things that really make it hard? What are the things you'd like to have addressed? That would make it easier for you to provide a landscape that makes it easy for the researchers to work remotely over data and for you as a CRC to benefit from that. Okay, I love naivety. I think that's a really fascinating one. I wonder who entered, or would somebody able to speak about naivety and what their perspective is there?
I put it in because I think in many CRCs there are many participants and individuals that really just don't think about they're thinking experiment by experiment, and not thinking that the data could be used elsewhere. I was looking at one example yesterday, Keith, where we were asked to fund a hellishly expensive experiment on a really important topic, which is the gene flows of feral pigs in Northern Australia, because we're under pressure from African swine fever. It's just to the north of us now, and is important. But boy, a lot of people have done it before, and there'll be since, because you've got to go out and shoot these animals by helicopter, so every sample costs you a fortune to gather. And there's little pockets of data all over the place, and people have, this application yesterday was talking as if it was the first one ever to do it, and actually it only gives you it will always be made up of a mosaic, if you like, across the country of these things. No one's ever going to be able to afford to map the entire area in one experiment because of the cost of doing so, besides the logistics. But if they matched up all the little separate data, I know of 5 times it's been done in various areas, it would be it could potentially become useful.
Okay. Well, thanks, Tim. I see also restrictive practices. Somebody like to speak to that?
Yeah, hi, that was me. Neil White. I work mostly for Queensland Government, and although I'm not in a CRC at the moment, I'm continually in projects working across between state government and universities, and it's very difficult for colleagues on the state government side to be able to have access to the same sort of level of services that's available through the university structure.
So is it restrictive practices at universities that they don't?
Oh, no, at the state government level.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
And I see here control. Control, in which perspective of control? I'm intrigued.
Sorry, Keith, that was me, Gavin here. It was more sort of, understanding who has ownership of the data in the first instance, and then who sort of has the capacity to manage access and utilization of the data.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We get a lot of questions around that, and there's often is not a black and white solution anyway, but one way of tackling that is just to get it to come to agreement on that right from the start, and especially not trying to come to agreement right at the end of the project or at the end of the CRC, when joint data has been created, but there's no clarity. There were no rules set up right from the start. Who was going to be actually be allowed use of that data? We do get questions about ownership of data. Who owns the data? And that is useful to a point, but I prefer to have a discussion about who is allowed to do things with the data, because you can jointly own data, or you can own data, but if nobody else is allowed to do anything with it, it's not particularly valuable. Whereas if you come to an agreement that when the CRC ends, that a certain group of organizations, a certain collaboration continue to use that data, then it becomes much more valuable, and it can be an asset that can be used beyond the lifetime of the CRC, also for spin-off projects and activities. I like the point there, authority. Who wrote authority? Can somebody explain a little more what your question is, your challenges around authority? very quiet. Okay. Okay, I think authority is an interesting question, and authority over the data that's produced, and where you as a CRC have rights over that, or where it sits with partners or with your researchers. And I think, again, this comes also, I think it's related to that question of control, who actually has access to that data. Finally, culture. Somebody wrote culture. Would you like to explain what you mean around culture?
That was me, but my printer next to me decided to explode and make a lot of noise. I find in a CRC you'll have very different cultures from small businesses that would think a Dropbox was very sophisticated through to the highest level universities and CSIRO in the country, and so they might have very different views about how they record and where they record and store their data. And they often find they're not thinking about what happens afterwards there, where their data may be useful for completely different means or completely different experimentation later on, but because it hasn't been thought of, it's been effectively used as a one-off.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine that's a challenge, especially with using different solutions and considering whether Dropbox is a sufficient solution or whether you need actually something that is more sophisticated or more protected for sensitive data. So I see here sharing data securely as one of the issues, and that's one of the things we hear a lot around the country. It's questions around what solutions are there for sharing data securely, and we're actually looking into, we've got a few platforms that we currently have partnerships with to look into that question. How can you share data securely in very sensitive data too? So, and that there's a whole array of different data challenges there depending on what the type of data is and how sensitive it is. Okay, so those were all the slides that I had prepared and all the questions that I had to you. I would like to thank you all for your time and attention. I don't know if there are any other questions or questions you'd like to throw into the group.
Let's throw it open. I found that really interesting, Keith. I've never used Mentimeter before. Menti?
Mentimeter?
Yeah, never experienced that. Certainly never done one of those voting things that's actually worked in a conference setting. I've been at a couple where there's been rather embarrassing blow-ups of those things. So congratulations on using it and making it work. Do we have any questions from the audience?
It's not so much a question, but I found the whole session very useful as someone who's not really had to engage with data management particularly, but with a CRC coming up on the rails now. I think that was a really good level for me to sort of start having a mind map, if you like, of how do we begin to think about a data management strategy in a new CRC. Thank you very much.
And I believe the Western Australians are talking to you, Keith, about a CRC proposal in ecological recording. I hope they are. It's a really interesting thing. In Western Australia now, there's legislation that requires companies and the state government to keep their ecological data on the same platforms and things, if you like, so that when you think about it, the people that gather the most data on species out in Western Australia, both terrestrial and aquatic, are the mining companies who have to do environmental studies. But at the moment, you only ever use that data for the one environmental impact study. And the Western Australian government has said, let's make those all available. So you can both cut the time for mine approvals, but get a much, much better data set and take it across the whole state. So it would revolutionise offset policies and things like that. Because if you're only looking at one small part of the state and there's a rare species in there, you really, it doesn't give you that much information unless you know what's happening everywhere else. And so they're talking about putting up a CRC to make that a much more interactive and useful thing. And I think they said they were talking to you guys about as the for how to actually do that data management.
I think there's a great opportunity there. That's hugely valuable data, and indeed for a lot of other uses too.
So, CRC around transformations in mining economies, that's one of the central value propositions, if you like, the aggregation of data, which is why your question about at what level do you need to do the data management? I came in with an answer at the CRC level because I was sort of thinking about how do you actually do this? How do you integrate multiple data sets so that you can get new meaning from the aggregation?
Yeah.
And it always, in my experience to date, has been, you get the data sets, they're different quality, they're collected using different methods, they have different, protocols behind them. So I'd be really interested in having a conversation about that in terms of what are the systems out there that can help do that aggregation in a meaningful way and comparable way.
Yeah, happy to have a chat. Rosie?
Yeah, if I may, Keith, I'll just jump in and make one comment. And it's really picking up on Tony, you're mentioning activities over in Western Australia. What I want to mention is Keith actually heads up a team of engagements people that are spread across the country, and that might be perhaps an extra slide we add in the pack for CRC folk to know that there is a local contact for you. So over in WA, we've got Nicola Burton, that can act as the first point of contact, and I think she has in some of these conversations. So Keith, don't hide your light under a bushel.
That's actually a good point, because I've focused all the slides around what does it mean to manage your data remotely and less about what does the ARDC have to offer. So yes, we have indeed an engagements team based all around the country, and yes, happy to help and provide advice and support. Didn't provide a complete overview of our service offerings. We provide a range of different services. A number of them did come up in this conversation today. But if you're interested in what we can provide and how we can help you and provide advice around data management strategies, data management plans, policies that you might want to put in place, systems you might want to put in place, please get in touch with us. And also questions around, for example, the Nectar Cloud, adopting that, or looking at other tools and solutions. Happy to provide advice and support.
And just with the slides that you used, you said you were going to make them available, Keith. Where do we? Obviously, we can go into the website, but where will they be available?
Tony, if I send you a PDF, can you circulate that to those that are in the meeting?
Even I can manage a PDF.
Thank you.
Jordan and Amelia going on, not really. He gets us to do it.
And hopefully it will even contain the responses anonymized, obviously, just like the bars you saw on the screen a second ago. But it will give you, I always find it quite interesting to see the responses to those survey questions too, to get an idea of what the general perspective is around priorities and what things are that people care about and challenges people identify.
Thank you very much. Thank you for organising it, Tony.
All right. Well, and that CRC, it's the same WOBSE that have said they'll go ahead with this other ecological one. I think buoyed by the fact that they got the transitioning mining economy CRC up. They were thinking about a second bid, and I think they said, bugger it, let's go for it this year. So actually at 2:30 we will be having a whole of CRC meeting with the CEOs of the CRCs and a few others to hear from the department on response to COVID. Things like that. Obviously it's massively disrupted the work of the CRCs as it has to everyone else. And the department's been incredibly good in being very flexible and accommodating, that sort of thing. So we're putting together all the CEOs to look at what categories are they in. So those that are just starting up a CRC have a lot more trouble now, like Time CRC that just got mentioned, to be that one, you know, getting your SMEs and others to sign up just at the moment. So we're hoping that the government will make money available to those new CRCs a bit quicker than is normally the case to keep the momentum going on them. Others that are coming to an end have different problems, so we'll be talking about those. But I do expect the CRC funding round to go ahead. Round 22 we're up to of the there. It'll most likely be delayed, but not by that much, because we know of 17 bids that are out there at the moment. Around this time of year, there's often somewhere between 15 and 25 bids around, and about 12 of them make it into the stage 1, and about 6 are shortlisted and about 4 funded generally, although we have 5 funded this year. And so likely, rather than a June deadline for stage 1, we're likely to have end of July. I don't expect the CRCPs, the new ones, the new projects, to be interrupted at all. In fact, they may be slightly sped up because the government's very keen to get the money that's available to them, because they're working with small businesses generally out and into the economy. So they actually sped up the last round to get the money out there, and all the ones that were named were contracted within a few weeks of them being named out there. So it's a good program that way. And then we will resume our conference next year. Basically, we'll cut and paste from this year into next. We still do have our early career researcher competition going. That's available on the website Thinkable. So and we've extended the deadline for that. So if you know anyone that's 2 years before their PhD or Masters, or 5 years after, they're qualified if they're a member of the CRC Association to go for that. There's a $5,000 prize for the best speaker there. That's our speaking competition that we've run now for I think nearly 25 years, and you know, we still will run that this year. We will still have a Ralph Slatcher lecture, but we haven't quite figured out how we're going to do that at the moment. It's scheduled as a press club lunch, but at the moment it would have to be a press club lunch without an audience, so we probably won't do that, and we can't gather around anymore. So we're still waiting to sort out some of the details. So thank you, Keith, for that today. Very informative. And thank you to the audience for joining us. So we'll sign off now.
Thank you all.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.